So I know innovation is top of mind for everybody, but when I say innovation, I'm talking about biotech getting more advanced. Right now, just like AI, biotech is in its infancy, and we're seeing really incredible innovations happening within biotech, within science, with technology, with AI. They're all coming together to give us ingredients that go deeper than just topical. And we're also seeing key ingredients being blended together in ways that have never been done before. So I'll give an example of exosomes, PDRN, peptides. They're all the rage right now. But right now, you see brands just using exosomes, just using PDRN, just using peptides. And I know for fact there are brands that are starting to blend those together, which is quite difficult. I think the clinical space, I think it's going to become more of the beauty business. I think we're going to see a flush out of a lot of these vibey brands. If the brands are not actually clinically and have proven results, they're not going to stay. The consumer wants results. They want results fast. And you're really only going to get that if you have the right ingredients.
Hello, I'm Mike Ryan. I'm the Chief Networking Officer at PIMS, and welcome to our second season of Minutes with Mike. Now in my 33rd year at PIMS, I've had the privilege of partnering with companies both large and small, supporting their PR and marketing through customized fulfillment and distribution that delivers measurable impact on their brand perception, boosts positive affinity, and fuels their overall brand performance. And throughout my career, I've had the chance to work alongside many talented folks. This is their story. On this show, we'll sit down with some of the world's top marketing and business thought leaders to learn more about their success, how they got there, how marketing helped them achieve their goals, what strategies they used, and what inspires them. Please join me on this journey as we learn from those who are changing the way we think about business. So sit back, enjoy. You're listening to Minutes with Mike.
Welcome, everybody, to Minutes with Mike. I have a fantastic guest to show everybody, Amy Kapolnek. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Amy, if you don't know her or haven't met her yet, she's the founder of the Forward Group. She's a fractional executive, a growth strategist, and investment advisor. I have so many questions, but of course, I do research before we ever get on air here. And your resume on LinkedIn is like a who's who of, like, in my dream world, if I could work for companies, you've hit every single one of them. Like, your dream world of where you wanted to work coincides with mine where I wish I worked, and you lived it. But like, before we get into all that, because I have questions supporting all that stuff, tell me how it started for you. Like, did you have because you certainly have your beauty brands as you step along, but did you always want to get into the beauty world, or were you always sort of looking for the next thing? Like, how did it start with you?
Yeah, so I actually have a little bit of an unconventional career path. I feel like a lot of individuals will, out of college, join a major conglomerate like L'Oreal or Shiseido or Estee and work their way up and then maybe get to a point where they're VP or an executive and then they leave and start their own company. That tends to be the trend in the industry. And for me, it was a little bit different. I always loved fashion and I always loved beauty. I was obsessed. But I think growing up how I did, I didn't even know that you could have a career like I have in the industries that I have. So after I graduated college, I packed up a U-Haul and I drove to New York City with no job, no place to live, slept in the U-Haul for 2 days while I found some place to live. And ended up along the way getting a job as a sales and marketing assistant. Executive is what they called, but we really weren't. We were more assistants.
I can't let that slide without jumping back in on that.
I told you I have some good stories.
You went to your parents and you said, I'm loading up the U-Haul and I'm just going. I'll figure it out when I get there."
Yeah, so I actually told them I was going to move to New York on Thanksgiving. I told my whole family. They thought I was joking. And I said, no, you guys, after Christmas on the 26th, I'm going to pack up, I'm going to drive. because at that time I was still at the University of Iowa. I went 4.5 years, and so I was getting ready to, like, I was like, I don't want to stay here, right? I was a little old at that point, and I was like, I want to go and get on with my life. So I told them on Thanksgiving that I was going to move to New York. I was going to sell my car, and yeah, I'd see them on Christmas. And they kind of laughed. They were like, okay. I show up on Christmas and they're like, where's your car? Our family Christmas. And I said, I sold it. And they're like, what? And I was like, yeah, that's my U-Haul out there. That's with all my stuff. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. And they were dumbfounded. They didn't actually think I was going to do it. And I left the next day.
It amazes me in so many different ways. Like one, of course, what pops into my brain as you're saying it is take some balls to do that. That's
It
first.
really it takes delusion as well.
You're right. Like there's comes a time and a place where you just want to. So like I'm also marrying it to my thoughts of my own children, right? So my children range in age from 30 to 20, and not only can I not picture them doing that, but it would be more like that. Can you rent me a U-Haul, find me a place, help me get a job, and that sort of thing.
Oh, of course. I think my generation's a little bit different. We went through pretty traumatic things at young ages, and I'm an elder millennial, borderline Gen X, so it's like we went through a lot. We kind of raised ourselves. I did not grow up in a wealthy family at all, definitely lower class. So I knew that if I wanted to make something of myself, I had to do it myself. The reason why I slept in a U-Haul is because I didn't have the additional cash to actually get a hotel room. I had just enough to put first, last, and security deposit. And this is 2007, 2008, just to give you context. So I only had like $3,000, $4,000 to my name. And all of that was wiped as soon as I got a studio apartment, super Upper West Side. We're talking 107th and Central Park West. It was not what it is today. Drug dealers, gang members, sadly, rapes were happening on Central Park West at that time, but that's the only place I could afford. And so it was a fifth floor walk up, old building. And I think I had like $100 to my name. And so I ended up making friends with the internet cafe. This was still a time when there was internet cafes on the corner. And I said, listen, I'm going to need to print a ton of resumes. I'm going to need some food. Like, can I just get a credit with you guys? And they were like, yeah, it's okay. That's like the neighborhood feeling, right? And so I went and I printed off resumes, and I went like door to door handing out my resumes all day long for weeks before I was able to get a job. And the job paid, I think it was like $24,000. My mom and my family would, you know, I don't know why they just didn't give me the money, but they would like mail me food. So they'd mail me like pasta, like dry goods, and like, which is such a Midwest thing to do. I'm from the Midwest, such a Midwest thing to do. But I ended up getting a job at a restaurant. I was a waiter and a bartender on the side as I had my first job. You had to hustle it out. And so to say all that, didn't love the sales side of the business at all, period. And so I exited out of that role pretty quickly. I was always a writer. I actually was published when I was a child. So I started writing a lot more. I started getting a lot of ghostwriting. This is the time when like bloggers, influencers, blogs were all the rage. And so these they're not influencers now, but well, now they're influencers, but back then they weren't. They needed people to write blogs for them like every day. So I was ghostwriting for pretty large bloggers at the time. I was also a contributing writer to like Maxim, Forbes, Lucky, Self when those were all around. And then I ended up getting an editor job at an indie magazine here, working my way up to the executive director of the magazine. And at that point, media was in a difficult period. A lot of publications were closing because everybody was consuming on .com and not print. So I looked around and I said, I don't think we're going to survive. And I think that was just a reality. I mean, if Self is closing and Lucky's closing, how are we going to survive? So thankfully, I was already freelancing because as an editor, you also don't make a lot of money. social media had like Instagram had just come out like 4 years prior. So brands were just starting to realize the power of Instagram. And I decided to make the jump into the forward group. And my first handful of clients was Gucci, Burberry, P&G for years, both in their portfolio and their venture studios, J&J, Diageo. So I was really lucky that after I made that jump, because I do think it was luck that I had those opportunities that then really helped propel the rest of my career in the forward group.
The life lessons you learn along the way tell a lot about the character of the person you are, right? And it hit it so on the head when you said, I am a Gen X. You're on the edge of Gen X, right? And I say this all the time at work, and people kind of hear it, but I don't think they really do hear it. Like it was like literally the school of hard knocks. Like, of course, it's not the uphill the school both ways type scenario, but I think that was the last generation where you know you were rolling up your sleeves and you were getting into it, but like you were taking your lumps along the way, and you never looked at it upon yourself as if like they're doing something wrong. They owe this to me. It was always like, how do I make myself better? How do I sell myself better? Or in your case, like you're doing something that you're really not that into, and you have this writing skill that you can lean back on. How do I make that work? How can I turn that? How can I monetize that into a career? And it shows a lot of who you are to be able to roll with that and make that connection.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I also, I think because of my upbringing, I realized that if I wanted to make money, I had to have diversified skill set. And I've carried that through my entire life, personal and professional. So, you know, I was in high school with jobs and I worked as a nanny. I worked as answering phones at a pizzeria. I worked at Kids Gap. And I think all of those, and then when I was in college, I transitioned more into waitressing and bartending because you can make more money. But I also was a receptionist at State Farm. I also was still a nanny. I also worked for the Johnson County prosecutor office. Like, I really tried to diversify my skill set as best as I could because I was like, for someone like me who doesn't have a safety net at all, period, zero, nothing, I can only rely on myself and my skills. I don't have anybody else to rely on. And I don't mean that from an emotional standpoint. I mean that from a financial standpoint. And I've done that throughout my entire career. So I was never just an editor. I was never just a sales executive. I'm never just the founder and a marketer at the Forward Group. It's like I have learned skill sets and I have pivoted so many times. I have reinvented myself so many times across the way. And I've also made investments into myself. I mean, I went to NYU, Stern School of Business, received my executive MBA. It was incredibly difficult because it was a full-time 2-year program in person while you're working full-time. And that investment, I'm just going to tell you, that's a $250,000 investment just so I can have more experience, more knowledge, more skills. So that's something that I do wish, and I don't want to get generational, but I do wish, I think that the younger generation or the generation coming up understood that you really need to not only hustle it out for a little bit. You don't have to be into hustle culture, but you do need to put in your time as the grunt or the entry because you need to learn and then you also need to diversify your skill set.
You said something when we first started talking, and I didn't mention anything, but it definitely sunk in. And you said, when you were a young girl, you never thought that there was a job like what you're doing out there. And what also I heard was because you were raised as I was from a generation that these opportunities really weren't there for women in the marketplace, right? You were a mother, and occasionally, as your children aged, you might go back and get a job, right? Doing both was not on the table, and doing both was not something you heard of. There were women that worked, and then there were the vast majority were mothers that were, as needed working. You mentioned that you didn't think it was an opportunity for you because you were raised in a society where women were looked upon as you're the matriarch of the family, you're in charge of taking care of the kids slash me, the husband slash the home. And oh yeah, if we have to make extra money, we'll fit you in somewhere, right? When did that click over that you're like, listen, if I'm U-hauling it across the country, if I'm jumping from job to job, if I am literally sleeping in this U-haul, making myself what I am today. Like when did that click that like I can do anything I want? Like when did that like hit your head?
Yeah, so my situation was a little different, I think, than what you're explaining. However, a lot of individuals, a lot of families in the area I grew up in Chicago, some of them had that dynamic where you could tell when the mom went back to work that they were probably struggling financially. I grew up in a single family home, so or single parent home. My mom was a single mom. She raised us. Unfortunately, and I'll be very candid here, my dad passed when I was very, very young. So my mom didn't have a choice but to raise us, me and my sister, my younger sister. So for me, the dynamic that you're talking about, I think actually negatively affected my mom because my mom was not prepared to step into that role of being both parents. She wasn't equipped with the knowledge of finances because she didn't get that from her parents. Her dad took every care of everything and her mom took care of the house. And that was passed down to my mom and her two other sisters that the man will take care of the finances and make more money and all of this. So when my mom was left with two extremely young children, she didn't know what to do. And there were bad decisions made throughout her life, and she did the best she could with the knowledge that she had. But I think from a very young age, I saw my situation, saw my life, and said, "This is not what I want." And I'm very young age. I remember being 8 years old saying, "I'm gonna be a doctor, and I'm gonna make a lot of money, and I'm just not gonna live like this anymore." And I didn't mean it in, like, a bad way towards my mom because she did literally the best job that any mom could have done. And I love her very dearly and we have an amazing relationship. But I think, kids just kind of have that finger on the pulse. And so I knew, the minute I was in 8th grade, even before I went to high school, I was going to go away for college. I really wanted to make something of myself. I wanted to get out of that neighborhood. I wanted to expand my horizons and my connections. And I did. Before I was even in college, I said, I'm not going back to Chicago. I'm not going back to that town. I need to do something else for myself. And so that's what I did. And I think I'm still trying to do that.
And so now we make the leap to the forward group, representing 112 brands in 24 countries and all
Yes.
the fantastic things that you do. Congratulations on all that growth. And, you guys are just absolutely slamming it. One of the things that when I have a lot of guests on here, they always tout is, scaling business and being able to know when the right time is to scale their business. And maybe you could share with us some do's and don'ts on there because I'm sure you get inundated with questions from brands saying like, now's the time to strike. I just gotta, I just sold my brand to this, or I'm going to be in this store in this region. What do you look for when you start working with a brand? What's the first question you would ask?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I have a pretty lengthy discovery process when I'm in discussions with a new potential client. I've learned that over the years, I've had the Fora Group for almost 13 years. And I've learned over the years that if you rush into business without doing any type of due diligence or what I call dating period, there are situations that can arise that could have been mitigated if there was just a longer, dating process, I guess I'll say. And what I mean by that is do I like the founder? Do I like the business that they're building? Do I like the way they do business? Do I like the company culture that they're building? Do we communicate well together? Do we trust each other? Do we respect each other? This isn't about can I do the job? I know I can do the job. And if there's any thought in my mind that I can't, I'm extremely upfront in that very first call of like, hey, I'm not your gal, but XYZ might be. So let me refer you to them. So I would say That's my thought process around it. We really need to be completely 100% aligned before we bring somebody onto the roster. I'm very lucky that our current roster is so strong. It's just these incredible female founders that are doing such innovative things to move their specific parts of the industry forward. And so I never want to add somebody to that roster that's not going to jive and fit into the culture that we've built here at the Forward Group. So I don't know if there's a initial question that we ask, but it's more of like a process that we take to make sure that everything's aligned. We're all going to work well together. We're going to work well together for years. A lot of my clients have been with me for years, and we're all going to be successful and happy.
I know that one of the things you offer too is this fractionalized offerings as part of
Yes.
building a brand, right? So when I saw that, I was really curious to ask you, like, so if somebody comes to you and says, I know there's a difference between consulting or being inside the brand versus consulting with the brand or being just sort of a fractionalized things like CMO and CFO and that sort of stuff. What are the things to weigh when deciding that if you're a brand? Like, instead of bringing somebody on full time, I'm just going to hire this fractionalized CMO. They're going to do my business. We're going to do a year contract or whatever it's going to be. What are the pros and cons of that? Or in your vision, is it all pro and no cons?
No, there are definitely pros and cons. There are plenty of founders that come across my desk weekly that are interested in this type of fractional executive help. Fact is that they're not ready. Their business is not ready. And that could be anything from they don't have the foundations built yet. It could be they don't have the financial capacity. A lot of times it's that. Fractional executives, even though we're fractional, we're not cheap. Like we're not going to be $1,000 a month and, for 40 hours a month.
Right.
That's just not how it works. I mean, these fractional executives are individuals that have, incredibly long, decades long experience. And so, when you're hiring a fractional executive, you're getting all of that. You're getting all of the connections. You're getting the frameworks and the templates that they've used. So there's quite a few brands that are not ready for fractional, and I usually evaluate that with a few questions that I ask to really understand where the business is. Now, one of the cons of hiring fractional executive is if your business is farther along and you don't have a CMO, a CGO, a CEO, you probably need a full time person. The fractional won't be able to keep up. And so that's another conversation where if I'm in a role as fractional CEO, fractional CMO, fractional CGO, those are the three fractionals I play in. I will have to go to the founder and say, listen, it's really time you need to hire someone full time because my hours aren't cutting it anymore. Your business needs more. And, a lot of people say you're talking yourself out of a job. But at the end of the day, like I want my client to be successful. That's one of the cons. If your business is further along, probably are going to need more at a certain point. And I think if your brand is not further along, not where it needs to be, you can hire a fractional executive, but you're going to be hemorrhaging money. You're not going to get everything out of that fractional executive that you would want because maybe you don't have team members. Maybe you don't have marketing foundations built. Maybe you don't have a large marketing budget. So why do you have a fractional executive here?
There are some quotes that I found from you that fit really nice here that I wanted to ask your opinion on. One of them, you said, stop trying to rush into retail, right? And I wanted to get your take because I was talking to a previous guest and they were touting the TikTok shop and where that's going and how it ties into retail. And that I feel like is changing and growing as we speak as to what the expectations are for brands with retail. I think not too long ago, and I certainly don't know it as well as you do, but these brands were like that was their home run, right? Like if they could get to a certain spot and get some shelf space and they're in with Ulta and Sephora and Walmart and wherever they're trying to get in with, touchdown. But now people are thinking, of course that's a good thing, maybe, but there's also this. Give me your ideas on that. Why not rush to retail? Like maybe why are they rushing to retail? And a second part of that is, what are your thoughts on the TikTok shops of the world and how the Metas and the Twitters and the Instagrams are going to get on board with that and have their own sort of shops that they offer up on there. Where do you think that's going?
Yeah. So I will die on the hill of not rushing into retail. I don't know why this change happened, but pre COVID, brands were more focused on .com.
Mm.
Maybe that's because Amazon wasn't really where it is today as far as beauty, where like now everybody's on there. And there just weren't any other channels to really be on besides .com and retail. And if retail wasn't going to work out, might as well lean into .com. But there was definitely this shift after COVID, which is interesting because if COVID taught us anything, it was to not rely on retail. But there was this shift after COVID where every brand, every founder was just obsessed with retail. And I was seeing so many failures and so many mistakes and so many burned moments, and I still do. And I'm just like, why are we rushing to retail?
Mhm.
Think what brand founders don't understand. And these are like obviously newer brand founders that aren't super far in their business life cycle is that they underestimate the costs and the logistics involved with filling that PO. So, on the cost side, which I know you know, unless they have terms with their co-man or a debt lending company to front the cost of that PO, they'll need to front the cost of that PO.
Right.
And that PO can be $1 million or more easily, easily. And, there's also the added, I would say there's also this missed opportunity to renegotiate pricing from a COG standpoint with their packaging manufacturer, their ingredient supplier, their co-man. A lot of founders don't do that. So instead of getting better pricing for this massive PO, now they're paying the same prices they were for 5,000 MOQ or 10,000 MOQ when they're producing hundreds of thousands of MOQs. I think that's something, yeah, they just don't realize. They don't understand the cash flow that they need. They don't understand also that they're not going to see that money in a year and a half come back to them because they need to put in a production order a year before, sometimes 8 months before, in order for it to get to the retailer in time. And then the retailer will usually have a net 30, net 60, net 90. So you're really lost on that cash for a year and a half. Also, these retailers require you to invest in additional third parties, like distributors that they work with or software that they have, and you have to pay that cost. So all of this gets really expensive really fast. I would say on the logistics side, again, which I know you know working for PIMS, they need to ensure that their entire supply chain can handle that volume and meet the deadline. Retailers are absolutely firm on the deadline. They will actually charge you if you do not meet the deadline. And this is where that inventory forecasting is crucial because retailers are planning a year in advance. So between all of this logistical side, cost side, I mean, there's other factors as well, which is the success you'll have in retail, which I can also touch on. So I guess let me backtrack. I'll touch on the success. There's also the the success part. So if you don't have an established community, if you don't have established brand awareness, the chances of you being able to compete with heritage brands, 10-year-old brands that are sitting right next to you in the product assortment is going to go down the toilet because the retailers don't care that you're an indie brand. They don't care that you have less budget. They don't care that you're in growth mode and that you're not a household name. They're going to hold you to the standards that they're holding to everybody else, the sell-through rate that they're holding to everybody else. And what happens is that the less you perform, the more shelf space they take from you. And it really is a race to becoming released.
Mhm.
So if the brand does not have the community, if they don't have the loyalty, if they don't have the financial and the human resources to support a retail, either initial expansion or even further expansion into other retailers, it's not going to work. And so that is why I'm so firm on do not get into retail. Now, I understand that retail is one of the fastest way to grow because they're placing $1 million POs. I get that, but I also think we have other channels now. Amazon is a massive player. We for all types of brands from mass to luxury. We have TikTok Shop now that has come into the mix, which is phenomenal for mass and prestige brands. You have retail and you still have .com. You also have other B2B, channels like Fair. So there's so much there's so many more channels out there in 2026 that we don't need to be rushing into retail because 99% of the brands that come across my desk, they get that PO and then they go, shit, how am I going to fulfill this? Shit, how am I going to stay into retail? Shit, how am I going to pay these marketing costs and display shelf costs and promotion costs that you have to pay and run every single quarter?
The,
I say I have another saying that says it's easy to get into retail, it's hard to stay into retail.
yeah, yeah, nailed that. I know you have a whole investor advisor side of the business too, and it completely makes sense to use somebody like you and the team at Forward, just because as you're tying everything in together, I think you said it best. Like sometimes these brands don't realize these line items add up, right? And as they're starting out, as they're beginning, they know there's going to be a certain outlay for this, certain outlay for that, but it quickly adds up, right? And certainly on the logistics end, like you're talking thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in investments prior to that first piece getting fucked off the shelf. So that part of the business perfectly ties in with that.
And I think also what is difficult for indie and new to market brands is that a lot of retailers demand that you have a multi SKU product assortment. And if you're new and you're launching with one product, two products, because you want to test product market fit, you want to grow slow, you maybe are trying to be smart with your financial decisions by not pouring so much money into so many products because your budget will be limited. You're not going to be able to market those. That's very contradictory to what retailers want. So there's so many reasons. I'm sure we could have a whole hour-long segment just on why you should not rush into retail.
Yeah. I have so many questions. I'm going to jump around a little bit because I'm afraid
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not.
okay.
So, all right. So I wanted to ask you, shifting gears a little bit. I want to talk to you about the consumer end of things, or D2C, right? Another quote I saw of yours, I don't want to read this here. You said, you're asking, do you know your customer, not just the age and where they live, but what their unmet needs are? And that hit home like fireworks when I read that, because that talks to many different things, right? And the first thing that popped up in my head is, I'm the chief networking officer here at PIMS, and networking, and we've seen each other at networking events.
Mhm.
Networking in part is meeting people to engage them. Hopefully you'll make a connection and make some sales with, right? So a big part of our sales training, and any good salesperson will tell you, right? Like you don't want to just know the one thing that they're calling about, that they've monetized you about, but what are the unmet needs that they have that they don't even realize you could help them with along the way? So I was like, oh my God, that says so much to so many. I definitely have to mention that. What did you mean when you said that?
So a lot of times I also have founders who are early in their conception stage, business building stage, and they come to me and they say, I'm building product X. And I said, great. Where's the white space? And what's the problem and solution you're solving for the customer? And they really can't answer that because they're basically creating the product for their need. And they haven't done the due diligence on, well, what does the consumer need? Because your individual need and the broader consumer need might not mesh well together. It might not be aligned. And, you're not just selling to yourself, right? You need to have a target audience of millions of people. And so millions of people also need to have the same challenge or the same problem that you need to have. There's also another layer to this where when we start getting into marketing, we need those insights in order to be able to do our job. We need those insights to be able to create creatives that speak to the consumer, create messaging that speaks to the consumer, and not speaks to it, but like emotionally resonates with them. I mean, we're talking like creating paid media, creating social media, creating emails, even creating additional products outside the initial products that again speak to their deepest values, needs, concerns, wants, interests. I always say when it comes to MPD, new product development, and marketing, you should be hitting on things that the consumer didn't even know was an issue until they see your ad, they see your social post, they see your product and say, oh my God, wait, that will solve my problem. I didn't even know I had one, but now I do. You can't get to that if you're not diving into customer persona and profiles. And a lot of times I only see a very surface level, the 25 to 55 lives in, Metropolis, is a woman. And it's like, okay, well, you just went from 330 million people in the US to 170. How, like, there's what we're not possibly going to speak to 170 million people. You don't need to go too niche. I think when you're first launching, it's actually good to niche a little bit, to have a tight core and then know, hey, this is my secondary market and this is my aspirational market. But start small because that core is going to be your first VIP loyal customers that are going to follow you forever.
Right. Touching upon your CMO end of things, right? So, I know you're a believer in the paid media fatigue, and sometimes why, that attributes to a lot why consumers will tune out ads specifically. Talk to me about that because I'm in the business of, creator, influencer, distribution, and you know I get a lot of feedback from paid versus unpaid, and which way people should go. A lot of people tie so much in on data and analytics. They're just, they're frozen to everything else. They don't ignore their community and the people that have been longtime followers, but sometimes they do it because the data supports this. Talk to me about that.
Okay, so I would say the first part is that I love data and there needs to be data decision making within a company. I think a lot of the brands that come across my desk, they're not looking at the data at all. It's like the opposite. And that's nerve-wracking because I'm like, you're making decisions, very important, vital, financial decisions on vibes, essentially. There is a balance, right? Where it's like, yes, use the data, but also you need to gut check yourself. Like your instincts as an individual, an executive, a founder. And then along with that, do the social listening that you're talking about, like, or the lack of. Like, you have to make sure that whatever decision you're making always pairs back to what the consumer wants or is missing or needs. So it's this balance between the three buckets of data, instinct, and community. The reason why I've said steer clear of paid media and go IRL if you can, first of all, that's very dependent on what level and growth phase you're at. You're at a certain growth phase, you need to be putting quite a bit of money into paid media as well as brand activations. Again, there needs to be a balance. However, in the beginning, if you don't have a substantial budget, you can't play on TikTok. TikTok's ecosystem makes it to where you need to invest into every single arm of that business, from shop to content to live to ads to affiliates. And if you're just starting out, you don't have the resources, like the work, like the people and the financial to actually tackle that channel. So you have to get creative, and you can't waste your entire budget on Meta or on TikTok, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point.
But I think that also, like, they're both instrumental, IRL versus the paid, and they're both used for different outcomes. So, like, we know that paid media is usually for brand awareness, conversion tool, while the IRL brand activations is what they're called, are more about creating community, inviting people to explore and experience this brand world, because that's what consumers want. They're so tired of product pushing brands. They're so fatigued with ads. They want to join something that is exciting, that's new. They want to experience the brand. They just don't want to use a product. I think there has to be a balance between the two, but both are very important.
Of course, it matters when somebody has a $50,000 budget and they ask you what to do versus somebody that has a $5 million budget, right? The world opens up. But sometimes they both have their difficulties, right? But we get a lot of clientele that they have caviar wishes and sort of hot dog budgets, right? So I can see, like, just in my small world of explaining to them like what the availability is on their budget and timing based upon doing some sort of fulfillment with them. I can only imagine what it's like on a much broader scale. So you did a really good job of sort of defining that. I wanted to ask you briefly about that community building. So,
Yeah.
things like pop-up shops, they have their own, what we used to call influencers, but now everybody calls them creators. It's a little mix of influencer and creators. How
Yes.
do you advise people with the creating partnerships or doing events and community building? Like, what's the best way to move forward with that? Is it something that you mix something that's sort of generated holistically and marry it to something that you purchase, or do you find it sort of going in certain instances the paid route's the way to go, or the opposite? Sorry, it's such a vague question, but I'm curious what you'd say.
No, no. So community building is incredibly important because when you look at brand marketing versus growth marketing can only take your business so far. After that, your growth will plateau. And the reason being is that you don't have the brand marketing side of the business, specifically the community and the creators, to help amplify growth. On the flip side, if you only have community and creators and you don't have a strong growth marketing arm of the business, you're going to be in the same situation. So, community building is so incredibly important. Community building is very difficult if you don't have, I mean, it's very difficult, period. It's even more difficult if you don't have the financial and human resources. So, I always tell the brands that are just starting out that don't have a huge budget, you have to lean into partnerships, brand partnerships, creator partnerships. There's a ton of creators out there that are just starting out that are trying to become influencers that will work with you on a brand ambassador level, or at least to create content for really, really limited pennies. And then there's obviously the brands. If you do a brand to brand partnership, there's usually no expenses there. And the idea is that you partner with a brand that has a similar audience that's not a stretch for both communities, both audiences to understand why this partnership is happening. There have been some partnerships in beauty that I've been like, that doesn't work. What are we doing here? And, I'm not privy to if that partnership was successful or not. Probably wasn't, but there has to be alignment on the brand, on the category, and then also specifically on that audience level. So that's my solution for when you're community building on a budget. If you're not community building on a budget and you have more human and financial resources to put through community, that's when I would say lean into the brand activations. But you have to understand where your base hotspot of communities are. Is it New York, LA, Miami, or is it actually Nashville, Oklahoma City, and Salt Lake? I know that those last three might not be as flashy as LA, New York, and Miami, but be real about it. You have to go where your consumers are. And to be honest, a lot of times that middle America gets left out. So that is through the data. So this is kind of where it gets back to where data is important to then ladder into something that necessarily isn't really into growth, right? I also get asked a lot of like metrics related to, well, okay, community building, it's so vague. How do we know that it's working? How do we know it's successful? And it's sometimes a loaded question. And I'm just getting into the tacticals here because I know that so many founders are interested in this. I just did a webinar yesterday exactly on the art of storytelling, through the different social media platforms, as well as like then how do you translate that art of storytelling into community building? And we had quite a few founders afterwards say, okay, great, I'm going to build community, but like, how do I figure out if it's working or not? Like, what am I looking for? And so some of those are like returning audience rate or engagement depth, and not just like, shares and comments, but more like what's the average watch time, cross platform migration, like are they following you from TikTok to IG to Amazon to purchase? And so I think like those type of metrics are really important because you can spend a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to build community, a lot. It is a full-time job plus. So you really need to be gauging, is this working or is it not? Because if it's not, you have to change your tactics.
What's the next big thing you see coming down the pike? I know, you're invested in beauty and the CPG and everything else you're doing. Like, what's the thing that it's exciting to you that's coming up? What, like, when you see it inevitably on the horizon and you're eager for it to arrive?
That is such a good question. So I'm gonna answer this in two different ways. Number one would be innovation. So I know innovation is top of mind for everybody, but when I say innovation, I'm talking about biotech getting more advanced. Right now, just like AI, biotech is in its infancy, and we're seeing really incredible innovations happening within biotech, within science, with technology. They're all with AI, they're all coming together to give us ingredients that will change, that go deeper than just topical.
Yeah.
And we're also seeing key ingredients being blended together in ways that have never been done before. So I'll give an example of exosomes, PDRN, peptides. They're all the rage right now. But right now, you see brands just using exosomes, just using PDRN, just using peptides. And I know for fact there are brands that are starting to blend those together, which is quite difficult.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that. And I think the clinical space is just, I think it's going to become more of the beauty business. I think we're going to see a flush out of a lot of these vibey brands. If the brands are not actually clinically and have proven results, they're not going to stay because the consumer wants results. They want results fast. And you're really only going to get that if you have the right ingredients. Fortunately, biotech is the way to go. So I'm really excited about to see that. Also, I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and she owns a compliance clinical trial lab, and they're already experimenting with, I don't even know the terminology. They're actually experimenting with, I guess, neurologic responses to products. So what they're doing is that instead of just doing a normal clinical trial where people are just using the product, they get before and after photos, they're using, instruments and technology to show if the skin changed. They're taking this one step further, and they're hooking up the subjects to this neurological instrument that will track if the product increases their happiness, their serotonin, how they're mentally reacting to the product. And now a lot of people don't know we have neurocosmetics. It's definitely an arm of the business. It hasn't taken off as much, but this is almost blending that. So I'm really excited to get into, to see where that goes as well, because it goes deeper than a user perception questionnaire. And then I would say, lastly, I mentioned this before, I'm really excited to see the fluffy brands kind of exit out of the industry, and for us as an industry to continue to have products that are verifiable, proven to work, mission led. I think that also got a little lost. We're really into cultural relevance and vibey feelings. I'd love to go back to mission led brands. So I think from a brand perspective and an industry perspective, that's where I would love. That's what I'm excited about.
You know why I've asked her to be on this program. If you've now watched this whole episode, this is a special lady with just great ideas and just such forward thinking. Well placed, the name of the company, the Forward Group, just because she's just got so many great ideas and so much history and background to support all that. What's the best way to get in touch with you if somebody's interested in talking more?
Yes. So you can either reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's my name, Amy Kapolnek, or you can email me, Amy, AMY, at thefwrd.com. And that's spelled the FWRD group.com.
Like I said, I had 20 questions prepared. We got through four of the ones I wanted to ask because I had to ask a million follow-ups to your great conversation points. So we're going to have to do a part two of this at some point.
Thank you. I would love that. I love talking to you, Mike. Like I said, we could have a whole podcast, just me and you talking about the
We should
industry.
think about
We should think about that.